You don't realize how powerful your absence is until someone feels it. Not when you beg, not when you explain, but when you finally choose peace over chaos and walk away without noise. That silence hits harder than any argument ever could. Because now she's left alone with the memories, the moments, and the version of you she thought would always stay. Moving on doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you finally started caring about yourself, and that shift changes everything. If you've ever wondered why letting go feels like weakness but creates the strongest reaction, stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. Comment your location where you're watching from, subscribe to the channel for more real, honest truth like this. When you move on, what really changes is not the situation, it is perception. While you were present, consistent, and emotionally available, your value lived in the background. Familiarity creates emotional safety, but it also creates assumption. The human mind is wired to normalize what is always there. Your effort became expected, your presence became predictable, and predictability slowly removes urgency. Not because you lacked value, but because value that feels guaranteed no longer triggers awareness. Absence interrupts that comfort. It forces the mind to confront something it avoided while everything felt stable. When you are no longer there to reassure, explain, or emotionally regulate the connection, the brain experiences loss before it experiences logic. This is important. People do not react to what they had. They react to what they no longer control. The silence creates a vacuum, and the mind rushes to fill it with meaning, memory, and imagined outcomes. That is where intensity begins. What many people misunderstand is that this reaction is not always about love. It is about attachment and identity. When someone has grown used to your emotional availability, your disappearance creates a threat to their internal narrative. It challenges the belief that you would always stay, always wait, always remain accessible. That challenge feels unsettling, and the brain labels that discomfort as desire, curiosity, or even regret. In reality, it is the shock of realizing something valuable is no longer within reach. Your absence also forces comparison. When you are gone, the mind does not replay the arguments. It replays the best moments. This is a well-documented psychological pattern. The brain romanticizes what it loses because memory prioritizes emotional peaks over everyday reality. By stepping away, you unintentionally allow your best version to become the reference point. Presence shows the whole picture. Absence edits it. There is also a deeper philosophical layer here. Human beings often recognize value only after separation, not because they are careless, but because awareness is sharpened by contrast. Light is most visible after darkness. Silence is loud only after noise stops. When you move on, you become contrast. You create a before and after. And that contrast forces reflection in a way constant availability never could. This is why trying harder rarely works, but letting go often does. Effort keeps the dynamic the same, distance changes it, and distance introduces consequence. When there is no immediate access to you, your role shifts from background presence to conscious thought. You are no longer experienced, you are contemplated. The key lesson here is not to disappear to provoke a reaction. That would miss the point entirely. The real power lies in choosing self-respect over emotional overextension. When you move on genuinely, not as a tactic but as a decision, the reaction is simply a byproduct, because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. Your presence made things feel safe. Your absence makes them feel real. When you move on, the most important shift is not emotional. It is symbolic. You are no longer asking to be chosen. You are choosing yourself, and psychologically, that speaks louder than any explanation ever could. Human beings are deeply attuned to signals of self-worth. We may not consciously articulate it, but we feel it immediately. The moment you stop chasing clarity, reassurance, or closure, your behavior begins to communicate something new. It says, I value my time, my energy, and my direction. That message lands even when nothing is said out loud. What often gets misinterpreted as jealousy is actually recalibration. When you step back and continue your life, you challenge an assumption that quietly formed over time. The assumption that you would remain available no matter what. That assumption creates emotional leverage. Once it disappears, perception changes. You are no longer framed as someone seeking validation. You are framed as someone with options, standards, and an internal compass. And that shift alters how you are evaluated. Self-worth expressed through action is fundamentally different from confidence expressed through words. Words can be dismissed. Actions create evidence. Moving on demonstrates that your identity does not collapse without attention, approval, or resolution. This is psychologically disarming because it contradicts a familiar narrative, the narrative that your investment meant dependence. When that narrative breaks, the mind has to reassess your value from a new angle. There is also a deeper truth here that often goes unspoken. Attraction is not sustained by need, it is sustained by polarity. When two people are equally self-directed, desire has space to exist. When one person is emotionally overextended, the dynamic becomes imbalanced. Moving on restores that balance not by force but by alignment. You return to your center, and when someone operates from their center, they naturally command respect. This is why attempts to appear unbothered rarely work if they are performative. The psychology only shifts when the detachment is real. When you genuinely invest in your growth, your purpose, and your forward motion, your energy changes. You speak differently, you move differently, you stop negotiating your value, and that internal shift is felt externally, even at a distance. Philosophically, this is about authorship. Are you the narrator of your life, or are you waiting to be written into someone else's story? Moving on is a declaration of authorship. It signals that your life has direction independent of anyone's response. That autonomy is rare, and rarity creates gravity. The closing insight is simple but demanding. If you want to be seen differently, you must live differently. Respect is not requested. It is revealed through the way you choose yourself when no one is watching. When you move on, the most profound effect often comes from something invisible, the loss of control. For as long as you remained available, someone else held the reins of the connection. They decided when to reach out, how much attention to give, and whether you were emotionally invested or not. That control is subtle but powerful, shaping behavior and perception without conscious awareness. The moment you step away, that framework collapses. Suddenly, the dynamics they relied on are gone. And it is in that absence of influence that they feel a reaction far stronger than anything words or confrontations could provoke. This is not about manipulation or strategy. It is about consequence. Human beings are wired to respond when expectations are disrupted. When someone realizes they no longer dictate your availability or influence your emotions, a cognitive dissonance occurs. Their internal narrative, which assumed your presence, now has to reconcile with a new reality. You are no longer an option. That tension creates reflection, discomfort, and, often, a profound emotional response. It is not always conscious, but it is unmistakable. What makes this even more fascinating from a psychological standpoint is how attachment patterns interact with autonomy. People often measure their connection and influence through the availability of others. When control is removed, they are confronted with the difference between what they thought they had and what is actually present. This leads to heightened awareness of what was undervalued while it was freely given. Absence, in this sense, functions as both a mirror and a magnifier. It exposes gaps in perception and amplifies the reality of what was taken for granted. There is also a philosophical dimension to this. Life, relationships, and emotional bonds are not static, they are dynamic. Influence is never guaranteed. When you stop being the predictable presence that someone relied upon, you remind them that nothing in life, especially human attention, is owed. That realization can be uncomfortable, even painful, because it forces introspection. It forces questions they may have avoided. Did I truly recognize their value? Did I overestimate my place in their life? Did I take for granted what was always there? This is why moving on creates a reaction that often seems disproportionate. It is not about the past. It is about the sudden absence of influence in the present. When control shifts, clarity emerges, and emotions are recalibrated. The person left behind experiences the gap between expectation and reality, and that gap carries emotional weight. The key insight here is simple but transformative. The power of moving on lies not in punishment, not in spite, but in consequence. When you reclaim your autonomy, you naturally dissolve someone else's control. You do not provoke them. You simply exist on your own terms. And that presence, independent and unshakable, leaves a mark deeper than any confrontation could. The closing thought is clear, influence is fleeting, but self-mastery is permanent. When you step away, you teach the most powerful lesson of all, that your life, your choices, and your worth are yours alone to determine.